Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew. I'm from the University of Michigan at the Hay Group, and my presentation will be on VaxChat, which is a agentic pipeline leveraging proprietary knowledge graphs and PubMed in the vaccine domain. So, a brief background on VIOLIN. So, VIOLIN stands for the Vaccine Investigation and Online Information Network. It's primarily consisting of 4,712 vaccines, 217 pathogens, and it's all manually curated data. So manually data mine data from things like papers or clinical trials. And on the right here is the one of the methods to kind of query violin right now, which is VaxQuery. And so as you can see, you can use keyword search and also a lot of drop-down menus and specific fields to fill out. So as for the data sources on this whole entire project, um, it's kind of a combination of Violin, SemmedDB, and PubMed. And SemmedDB is basically um, it was a effort to like take every single PubMed abstract up until like um, I think 2023 and essentially embed or like derive triples from them using UMLS. And I guess the underlying program to do this conversion was it's using something called SEMREP, which is short for semantic representation. And then PubMed uses or we use an API from PubMed Central, and so we can retrieve publicly accessible full text or abstract articles. And a little bit more in depth on the violin database structure. So violin is composed of a lot of tables. So displayed here is vaccine, pathogen, and host in red. And these tables are pretty property rich, and they also interrelate with other programs and other tables and other databases. Um, for instance, VexJoe's up here. And then what we did is that we kind of processed violin into a smaller or into a knowledge graph. And so right now, violin is like a tabular or relational database. And so we kind of converted it into a knowledge graph form. And also, violin is aligned with vaccine ontology. And so, for instance, like the vaccine table has vaccine ontology references. So this project is kind of utilizing, or it's focused on the application of large language models. Um, and so the main benefits of utilizing large language models is that it kind of reduces the barrier to like accessibility or the barrier to information, increasing accessibility by enabling natural language querying. So instead of previously using VaxQuery where you have to do keyword search and uh, select a lot of different options with the drop-down menu. You can instead just use your natural language in the form of a question to kind of query instead. Um, and there is some challenges with applying large language models. One of the most like notorious ones is the reliability of information and model hallucination. And typically, model hallucination is just any false generation of information. And typically, what we see is it's due to out outdated trained knowledge. So, for instance, like a large language model trained a couple of years ago is not aware of the developments in research or in knowledge in the last like 3 years. So I guess the solution to solve this problem is by leveraging retrieval augmented generation, which can enable us to use our proprietary data source to answer user queries and also solves the hallucination problem. So a little bit more in depth on retrieval augmented generation. I guess the core concept of retrieval augmented generation is you provide the large language model with some context or ground truth. from which it could generate on. So instead of like implicitly or entirely relying on the model's like trained knowledge, you kind of supply it with some supplementary knowledge to help it bridge the gap and reduce hallucination. So in this example, there's a user query here, and this user query is kind of used to determine or to retrieve relevant data from a data source. And this is the output of the retrieval. And then the combination of the original user query and the retrieved documents is used in the final generation here. And you get a answer that is more up to date, more grounded in truth, and reduces model hallucination. So kind of with the widespread use and growth in large language models has been the growth of agentic AI. Essentially, agentic AI is pretty much considered to be any system that is dynamic and involves some sort of decision making. And so recently, there's been really widespread use in finance and engineering applications, and as well as in bioinformatics or in the medical domain. So we introduced VaxChat, which is this, which is described by this high-level workflow right here. So as you can see, the oh, yeah. So as you can see, there's pretty much a linear workflow, and it has some feedback. So starting from the beginning, we take a user query, and we use an agent to determine the tool that we'll use for retrieval. So we'll select one of these four tools, and these four tools, or one of them, will give us retrieved data. And then there's a second agentic stage, which is the evaluator, which kind of determines the relevance of the retrieval. So we're kind of gauging the success of our retrieval. And as you can see, there's kind of like three different states here where we either have like a completely successful retrieval, where the data we got was completely relevant and was able to answer the question entirely. And then we have two states here where it's partial or complete failure. So this kind of allows some feedback in the workflow, and it allows for the answering of a little bit more nuanced questions that might actually require like a combination of retrieval and sources. Um, so I guess a little bit more detail on the tools. So these top two, Cipher and Embedded Search, are related to VIOLIN KG, and SemmedDB and PubMed are related to those as well. Um, so Cipher search is the way it would work is the user query is directly converted into a VIOLIN KG Cipher query. So Cipher is Neo4j's or our knowledge graphs querying language. So this is just a direct conversion. Embedded search uses a basically all of the nodes in the knowledge graph were embedded, and so they reside in a vector store. And then what we can do is we can kind of embed the user query and just do k-nearest neighbor search on this vector store and kind of just retrieve, the top nodes. Semmed search involves querying the Semmed knowledge graph. Um, so the Semmed knowledge graph or this querying method is using embedded search as well. And then finally, PubMed search, it queries PubMed through the Entra's API. And the way it does this is the agent, when it selects a tool, will actually also specify some tool parameters defined specifically for like each different tool. And for instance, PubMed search, it has two tool parameters, and one of them is the keyword search. So like what keywords are used to search for the papers, and like the paper type, which is either full length or abstract. So this is the VaxChat interface. So it just adopts the traditional chat interface. Um, and so you can see that we have the responses here. And if you click this button, you can actually see like there's more transparency. And so you can see the retrieved data that the VaxChat uses to generate this response. So this is a little bit more in depth on the VaxChat agent itself and the decision-making process. So in this example, we're looking for vaccines that target brucellosis. And so the agent makes a decision on what tool to use. Of the four, it chooses embedded search on the knowledge graph, and it basically runs a query that results in data right here. And as you can see, this is just a bunch of vaccine names, and they all target brucella. So using this is the evaluator stage. The evaluator model is essentially taking all this data and then looking at the original user query and determining whether this retrieval is relevant. And it determines that this retrieval is complete. And so it moves on to final answer generation. And so as you can see here, this is the final answer in natural language using the retrieved data. So these are the two knowledge graphs that were used in this work. So on the left, we have VIOLIN, and on the right, we have SemmedDB. So uh, I think one thing I wanted to point out here was VIOLIN is less nodes in volume, but each node kind of contains more information. And you can see this by the property count. But also note that these properties are pretty detailed. There's a lot of content in each of these properties, whereas in the SemmedDB, there's a lot of nodes and fewer properties, and in the properties themselves, there's less information. I just wanted to know that this is a smaller subset of all of SemmedDB. All of SemmedDB is probably uh, originally SemmedDB's in tabular form as well, and I believe it's in the like 300 to 400 million row range. And so this number is pretty off, or this is a small subset. And so these are some examples of the responses or user query and generated response pairs that VaxChat has, or that's from VaxChat. And you can see the like VaxChat is able to reference the retrieved data, which kind of makes it more grounded. So as you can see here, it says the retrieve studies indicate that P53 interacts with various proteins such as MDM2, which regulates its activity. And it kind of has a little bit more, uh, it has the ability to kind of use examples, as you can see. And so it's a little bit more grounded in its responses, and it has uh, key information it can draw on. So these are the advantages of VaxChat. One of them is it reduces the barrier to query. So as opposed to using something like VaxQuery, you can use natural language, which I think is more convenient um, and more accessible to others that may not know um, the certain keywords for their search. Can also be faster just because you essentially just type your question as is rather than having to do this conversion to keyword search and the drop-down menus. And further, it can unify different data sources. So as you can see, or as you saw previously, VaxChat can essentially query multiple data sources and retrieve and have multiple retrievals, which can essentially use a combination of data sources to answer a user query. Limitations is that the version of VIOLIN that we use in the knowledge graph and the version of SemmedDB we use in its knowledge graph are incomplete. For instance, VIOLIN is composed of uh 13, or it's a composed of a lot of tables in the tens, like I think over 50, and we only use bio or vaccine, host, and pathogen in our work. And as mentioned before, SemmedDB is in the hundreds of millions of rows range, and we only have about a million in our knowledge graph. And another limitation that's maybe less fixable is that PubMed Central articles are only publicly and free accessible articles. So something like journal articles are not really accessible unless you have like a API key for those sources. Some future work is finishing the integration on the VIOLIN website. So we hope that we can have VaxChat on the ViolinNet website. Integrate ontology to improve semantic quality of the knowledge graph. So some methods that we can employ here are kind of structuring the knowledge graph with ontology as well. Possibly like possible methods we could use is like using ontological embeddings and embedding models to embed our graph space, and scale the knowledge graph to encompass all of VIOLIN. So, there's other VIOLIN tables that we love to use uh, in VaxChat as well, such as the gene table or possibly the adjuvant as well. And this can just enable us to answer a broader range of questions and also leverage more of VIOLIN's high quality, manually mined data and knowledge. And so for our acknowledgements, it was funded by the U24 grant and also through the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program at the University of Michigan. And here's the contact and code.